Hi, Assassins. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books. Hi, this is Cami, and welcome to our special episode, The Gods and Goddesses of Throne of Glass. We've done special episodes before, like the reveal during our Crown of Midnight deep dives and our Onyx Storm episodes. And I am so hyped to dive into another one. For this episode, I'll be taking the lead because the gods, goddesses, and mythology of the Throne of Glass world and the larger Maasverse are one of my personal deep dive obsessions. That's actually how we're structuring special episodes moving forward. Sometimes you'll hear from both of us on a special episode, and sometimes just one of us will take the reins, depending on who's the lead for that topic. We've chosen to put this episode out before starting Queen of Shadows because to us, that's kind of when the gods and goddesses start coming up a lot more and playing a part in the overall story. We want you, our assassins, to be able to use this episode as a reference point. And if there's one thing I can do, it's yap about world building and lore. So let's talk about the gods and goddesses of Throne of Glass. What do we know about them? Who are they? And what is their purpose in our story? That being said, if you haven't read all of Throne of Glass, please do not continue. This episode will contain spoilers for the entire series. Also, guys, please hype me up because it is so weird to do an entire episode without Brooke here to, chat with. From the second I started planning this episode, I knew I'd start with the question one of my favorite professors opened our very first class with. Why do we have to talk about a world's mythology to really understand it? And the answer that he gave us is simple. Because mythology is the blueprint of a world's soul, especially in a fantasy world. It tells us what people believe in, what they honor, what they fear, and what they think happens when life ends or when things begin. Even if the gods in Throne of Glass aren't walking around on the page, their presence or absence often shapes a lot of that world. It shapes how magic works, how power is passed down, what sacrifices are expected, and who gets to decide what's right or wrong. When we explore a world's mythology, we're not just learning background lore. We're getting to the root of why things are the way they are. We understand why characters pray, why they rebel, and why they sacrifice. And in the best stories, those myths aren't just world building. They're actually reflections. They ask us to look at our own beliefs, our own systems, and then ask who gets to shape the story and what happens when we say no. So yeah, mythology matters. Mythology is where the truth of the world lives, especially in fantasy. And if we want to truly understand the world we're reading, we have to start with its mythology, with its gods. So now that I'm done waxing poetic about why I love mythology so much, let's set some context for the gods and goddesses. When we talk about gods and goddesses, we have to talk about religion. The religion in Throne of Glass is never given a name. However, we get some hints about what religion is mostly followed through the holidays that are mentioned, like Yule, Samhain, or Samhain, and Beltane or Beltane. These holidays fall into the pagan category, with most of them having either Gaelic or Germanic roots. I feel like paganism often gets this very strange rep, but if you don't know about paganism, it mostly focuses on a deep respect for nature and does honor various deities, gods, goddesses, and spirits who are also often associated with nature rather than focusing on one god. That being said, paganism isn't a monolithic religion. It's been built through traditions and practices that pull from different cultures and time periods. When looking at the Throne of Glass world, where fae, humans, magic wielders, and a variety of other creatures exist, it makes sense that SJM chose to go this route in terms of the religion in this world. And now let's get into it, the gods and goddesses. When I counted it all up, I came up with 18 gods and goddesses. We know that there are 12 gods and goddesses who are present at the Forging of the Lock in Kingdom of Ash, and are sent back to their home world, though that's not exactly how they imagined it, which we'll get to. But let's start with those 12, or who I believe those 12 to have possibly been. That's Mala, Deanna, the three-faced goddess, Silba, Hellas, Aneth, or Anaith, I don't know, Kiva, Farner, Themis, Lannis, and Loomis. You might be thinking, that's only 11. Actually, I'm pretty sure no one else counted, but I only listed off 11, and That's for a reason. Tahom and Vanth are included in this section, but I am not actually 100% convinced that either of them can be counted in the 12 gods at the end of Kingdom of Ash, meaning that there might be one unknown god. But let's start with Mala. Mala Firebringer, Sun Goddess, Lady of Light, Learning, and Fire. In my opinion, this is the goddess that we learn the most about. We learn about her through world building / lore, but also from her actions in Heir of Fire and Kingdom of Ash. Unlike some of the other gods and goddesses in the Throne of Glass pantheon, Mala doesn't seem to have a direct inspiration from our human mythology. She is the goddess of light, who is Thea in Greek mythology, which if you've read all the Maasverse, that's interesting. In Heir of Fire, we get a depiction of her. Her figurine bears a polished bronze disc upheld between her raised hands, and she's also connected to the sacred sun stags. So, who is Mala? Mala is Deanna's sister. In Heir of Fire, we learn that they're quote-unquote eternal rivals, though Aelin seems to think that there's more to the story, and I do too. But I'll talk about that in the Deanna section. Mala has fire power and raw magic. She fell in love with Brandon Galathinius and gave him her fire magic. Before this, Brandon had no magic. Mala loved Brandon so much that she yielded her immortality for him and bound herself to a quote-unquote mortal body. This is kind of where I start to have questions because Brandon was a Fae king, so I'm actually not 100% sure if Mala yielded her immortality and meant to live a human lifespan, or if she meant to live a Fae lifespan. Also, right about at this point in the episode, it started heavily thundering, so if you hear that, I am so sorry. Regardless, it doesn't matter because during the Second Valg War, Mala gave up her mortal body to forge the lock. So she gave up everything, her body, her mate, her life, and her memories of these things. In forging the lock, she forgot about her daughter, her mate, except maybe she didn't. And again, we'll get to that. After forging the lock, Mala was allowed to exist as a goddess. We also learned that Mala had many children, not just Elena, meaning there are other Mala descendants out there that we just don't know about, which you guys know how I feel about things that we don't know about. I hate that we don't know about it. However, Mala's fire power was only inherited by the Galathinius house. Her raw magic was inherited by the Haviliard house. Elena is said to have received some of that raw magic, and it's also why Dorian's magic is raw magic. That is also the reason why Aelin is the one who has to sacrifice herself. After Brandon and Mala, there were apparently no other Firebringers in the Galathinius line. Aelin was the first one in centuries. Again, do we believe that? I don't know. But let's talk about Mala's actions. I cannot emphasize this enough. Mala is the real MVP. Out of all the gods and goddesses we learn about, Mala seems to be the one with the most human emotions, the most empathy. I'm not sure how to put it, but Mala feels more human and compassionate than the other gods and goddesses. Maybe it's because, like I said earlier, she's experienced love, both through her mating with Brandon, but also through becoming a mother. I don't know. We talk about this in our deep dives too, but a lot of people connect Mala to Aelin, and I totally see that. Aelin has her fire magic, and Mala helps her out a few times throughout the series. But I'm also more in the camp that Mala is drawn to helping out Rowan. This is because of Heir of Fire. Rowan prays to her before they head off to confront Maeve. He asks Mala to watch over Aelin and guide her through her encounter with Maeve. And he also asks for Mala to help them find a way to stay together, if that's even possible. We know that both of these things come true. Aelin survives her encounter with Maeve, and she gets some of the info she needs. And most importantly, Rowan is freed from his blood oath. At the end of Heir of Fire, Rowan even comments that Mala must agree with them working together because everything ended up working out. In Kingdom of Ash, Mala steps in again. Her facade starts to crack when she flinches as Elena is destroyed by Deanna. Then Mala gives Aelin a kernel of her power back and tells her that the tattoo on her back is a map back home. Rowan filled it with word marks that would help Aelin return if that became a possibility for her, which it does, and Aelin uses that map to get back home. Mala also tells Aelin that she remembers it all. She remembers them, and then Mala willingly goes back to the gods and goddesses' homeworld, and then encourages Aelin to trap the gods and goddesses in their homeworld with the creatures from the Hell Realm. Again, Mala, real MVP. The final lines from Mala in Kingdom of Ash are, "To a better world." And now let's get into Deanna, who is honestly the opposite of Mala. Truly, they could not be more different. Deanna is the moon goddess, Lady of the Hunt. Some of her other names are Lady of Maidens and the Protector of the Young. Deanna does have a counterpart in our human mythology. She is heavily inspired by Diana, spelled Diana, who is the Roman goddess of the moon, the hunt, and nature. Diana's Greek counterpart is Artemis, who is more widely known, at least in my opinion. In Air of Fire, her figurine is depicted as crowned with a star and armed with a bow and quiver, which again is pretty in line with depictions of Diana and Artemis in our human mythology. During the Yulma service in Throne of Glass, Selena is gifted a golden arrow, which is meant to represent Deanna. Sorry, now I'm getting confused. So, who is she? Deanna is Mala's sister. Like we mentioned in Mala's section in Air of Fire, we learned that Mala and Deanna are quote-unquote eternal rivals. But there is definitely more to that story. I personally do not believe that Deanna and Mala have always hated each other. I think their issues probably started when Mala yielded her mortality to be with Brannon, and then turned into possibly a full-blown rivalry when Mala's daughter, Elena, royally fucked up by misusing the lock. Deanna is just like all the other gods. She was trapped in Aurelia and wants out. So it makes sense to be absolutely pissed off that your sister's daughter stupidly took that option away. I have a lot of feelings about Elena. I will not get into them right now. But I see Deanna's frustration. Through that lens, Deanna's actions in Throne of Glass make a lot more sense, at least in my opinion. I think another element that we could consider is Deanna's goddesshood. That I think makes sense why she would be pissed off at Aurelia and humans as a whole. Deanna has essentially been replaced by Mab, who may have immortalized into godhood. But Deanna existed way before Mab took her place. We said this in episode 4 of our Air of Fire deep dives, but we can assume that any god or goddess, including Deanna, would not take lightly to being replaced. So, did they become rivals when Mab took Deanna's place? Why would Mala be the one who Deanna hates over that? I don't know. Maybe she was mad at all of them for letting that happen to her. And again, while Maeve may be a valid queen, I just find it very hard to believe that Maeve could actually do this, like the whole concept of switching out goddesses, which Rowan seems to confirm when he says that Deanna was the original sister's name, but it's the humans who gave her some of Mab's traits, like hunting and the hounds. So it's not like they were actually switched out in the realm where the gods reside, which we see in Empire of Storms and Kingdom of Ash, because the Deanna that we meet in those books seems to be the OG Deanna in both of those instances. In the flashback scene in Empire of Storms, Elena describes Deanna as the one with a voice of steel and shields and arrows. And now let's talk about Deanna's actions. The first time we meet Deanna, she is full-on possessing our girl Aelin. In Empire of Storms, Aelin uses her magic and the Karanan bond with Rowan to fight off the Valg in Skull's Bay. However, during this encounter, Aelin is wearing the Amulet of Orinth, and because the Amulet of Orinth is a word key, it merges with her magic, which opens a temporary word gate. This is when Deanna decides to step through and possess Aelin and begins trying to access Aelin's deeper reserve of power. What she was trying to do here is so confusing to me. It is kind of explained in the books, but I don't understand Deanna's purpose here because it could not have fixed anything. During this, though, Deanna gives Rowan a warning for Aelin. Quote, "Flame and iron, together bound, merge into silver to learn what must be found." SJM loves her riddles, you guys. And honestly, I do too. But basically, this means that Aelin has to wield the lock to return the keys. Okay? During this, Deanna transforms Aelin's fire into moonfire, which is a cold, star-like flame that burns. I'm not going to get into that right now, but you guys know how I feel about certain things that have to do with stars. Okay? Rowan, however, is able to use their bond to help Aelin come back to herself. But through this, we learn that Deanna has actually been hunting Aelin, not watching over her. This possession is a reminder that Aelin's fate ultimately belongs to the gods, in their eyes. The second time we meet Deanna is in Kingdom of Ash. Aelin sacrifices all of herself to forge the lock. But She tries to make a bargain instead, asking for Elena's spirit to be spared, and Aelin and the crew will deal with Erewhon. And Deanna is just, a bitch during this. She laughs and reveals the gods never planned to banish Erewhon or honor any promises they made to the mortals, the humans. Deanna destroys Elena's spirit and uses the lock to return to her own world. This is when Mala betrays all of the gods, but I will get into that later. We'll go through a timeline of the gods in a little bit. Next up, we have the three-faced goddess. And again, I wish I could knew how to insert sounds because we should insert the sound here. I've been waiting for this one. Turn it up. Because I have been waiting for this one. Okay. I have so much to say about the three-faced goddess, and a lot of it is Maasverse related, so I won't get too much into that here. Anyway, the three-faced goddess is worshipped by the Iron Teeth witches. The three-faced goddess has three physical manifestations: maiden, mother, and crone. Each of these physical manifestations is connected to one of the Iron Teeth clans. The maiden is represented through the Blue Blood clan, the mother through the Blackbeak clan, and the crone through the Yellowlegs clan. We are first formally introduced to the three-faced goddess in Air of Fire. Manon says that she feels a pull or an ebb and flow in the world. She calls it, quote, that invisible current that some called fate and some called the loom of the three-faced goddess. This is a larger reference to the weavers of fate that exist in the mythologies of various cultures in our human world. The Norns in Norse mythology and the Moirae in Greek mythology. In Norse mythology, the three Norns each represent something. Urd represents the past, Verdandi represents the present, and Skuld represents the future. In Greek mythology, the Moirae, often known as the Fates, are the three goddesses who control the destiny of every living being. They are Clotho, that should sound familiar to you, who spins the thread of life, Lachesis, who measures the thread's length, and Atropos, who cuts the thread, thus determining the moment of death. We learn that the three-faced goddess is represented by the eye of Elena, or, more clearly, two overlapping circles inside a greater circle. So, what is the three-faced goddess's deal? Gods, do I wish that SJM had done more with this character, because honestly, she kind of ends up being like all the other gods, cruel and uncaring. In the Witch Mirror flashback in Empire of Storms, we see the three-faced goddess as Elena realizes her mistake with the lock. In this moment, she is described as, quote, the one with three faces said, we will wait, but there must be a price and a promise. Basically, this is when the three-faced goddess suggests that someone from Mala's bloodline will have to die in the future to forge a new lock and seal the gate. And that Elena must be the one to lead and guide this future person, just as her father was once prepared to do, and then the gods will keep their promise to take Erewhon with them. We know how that ends up turning out. So, basically, the three-faced goddess is the one who suggests the nameless is my price prophecy. In Iron Teeth legend, the three-faced goddess is also the one who gave them their iron teeth and nails and made it so that they mostly have daughters. And now let's get into Silba. Silba is the goddess of healing, healers, and gentle deaths. She is the goddess that the Torre Chesme worships. Silba's bloodline runs through the healers in the southern continent. Silba's symbol is the owl, which is carved all over the Torre Chesme. Maeve also has an enslaved healer who is trapped in their secondary form, which just so happens to be an owl as well. Healers on the southern continent wear lavender robes, which is Silba's color. Silba, to me, doesn't seem directly inspired by pre-existing mythology. In Greek mythology, Hygeia is the goddess of healing, Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war, and she's often depicted with owls. Minerva, which is Athena's Roman counterpart, is also connected to owls. And Sulis is a Celtic goddess of healing and is often connected to water/hot springs, which we do see connected to Silba and Tower of Dawn. So I think Silba could be loosely inspired by some of these elements in these different healing goddesses. What is Silba's deal? Honestly, we don't learn much about her, which I think is crazy because Irene is so connected to Silba. Silba created Athral's ring, which grants the wearer immunity from the Valg. This is the ring that Aelin finds in the cave in Air of Fire, and that is also the same ring that Aelin slips onto Maeve's finger to destroy her in Kingdom of Ash. In Tower of Dawn, though, we learned that in the southern continent / Antica, the Empire had welcomed 36 gods into their pantheon, Silba being one of them. Even in this, quote, city of gods, Silba reigns unchallenged. Why don't we know more about her then? Most of the people who receive Silba's gifts are female, though there are some male healers. In Tower of Dawn, we also learn about Silba's womb, which is a sacred bathing chamber in the lower levels of the Torre Chesme. The womb is filled with stone tubs that are filled with natural hot spring water. Before entering, acolytes must wash in the antechambers and wear lavender robes, which again, like I mentioned earlier, that's Silba's color. Each acolyte brings a bell engraved with her name and entry date, which is hung between the pillars. The womb is meant to reconnect healers with Silba, and Irene's powers are said to be a gift from Silba herself. Overall, Silba seems to be a kind, gentle goddess. But let's move on to talking about Hellas. Hellas is called the Dark God, the god of violent death, and the ruler of the burning realm of the underworld. So, yeah. In the series, he is deeply connected to Lorcan, whose powers are said to be a gift from Hellas. During the flashback scene in Empire of Storms, Elena describes Hellas as the one of darkness and death. Hellas is also the consort of Aneith, which is very cute since Lorcan and Elide end up together, and the god that we connect with Elide is Aneith. Hellas does not have a direct link to the mythology of our world. Obviously, his name is derived from Hel, so Hellas, Hel. In Greek mythology, though, Hades is the ruler of the underworld. The main link that I could find, though, is that Hellas is actually the OG name of Greece. The ancient Greeks referred to Greece as Hellas. This comes from the name Helen, who is the man who gave his name to the Greek people. And now Aneith. I might be pronouncing that wrong, and I'm going to own that fully. It could be Anaith, but I think it's Aneith. Aneith is the lady of wise things and the goddess of knowledge and slow deaths. Like I mentioned earlier, Aneith is Hellas' consort. When I first read Throne of Glass, I thought Aneith was probably inspired by Athena, who is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war. But then as I prepped for this episode, I did read through the Throne of Glass wiki, which shout out to anyone who's ever helped put that together, where it seems like SJM's inspo for Aneith might have come from Neith, who is the Egyptian goddess of wisdom and hunting. I think it's probably a mix of both. What is Aneith's deal? In Empire of Storms, we see that Aneith is pretty much like all the other gods. During the Witch Mirror flashback, we see that Aneith suggests the gods repay the betrayal by the Earth Beasts, aka the humans and Elena, by releasing Erewhon from his coffin. So, wise but not kind, okay? Elena begs them not to do that, though. Aneith constantly watches over Elide and kind of whispers in her mind several times throughout the series. In Empire of Storms, Aneith is present during Elena's flashback scene. She's described as, quote, the one who saw all with wise, calm eyes. Elide continues to pray to Aneith throughout the series until Kingdom of Ash. As they search for Aelin after she's captured by Maeve, Elide realizes that Aneith has gone kind of silent. Aneith pops back in, though, when Rowan is torturing one of Maeve's commanders and instructs Elide to see. This phrase is repeated throughout several of their silent conversations, and this is the first and only time that Aneith directly speaks to Elide. Elide later realizes that Aneith may have been warning her about what happens if the gods don't get their way. So, yeah. But Elide starts realizing that Aneith probably never actually cared about her, just the outcome of everything. After this, Aneith goes silent again, and Elide takes that as a sign that she's no longer needed by Aneith. And then that's when Elide decides that she doesn't need the goddess either. I love Elide. Again, that's probably because in hindsight, Aneith was just guiding Elide to the path that would allow her to help Aelin to forge the lock. Our next god is Kiba, the god of atonement. And that's pretty much all that we learn about Kiba. Erebin claims that he prays at Kiba's temple while Aelin is in the Red Desert, but just like we said back then, that's hard to believe. Kiba means to protect or shelter in Hebrew. In Greek mythology, Zeus is kind of seen as the god of atonement, though Dionysus is also the god of second chances, so maybe there's some inspo there. I do just feel like Kiba was kind of made up by SJM, which I love. We just don't learn enough about Kiva to decide. Then we have Farner. Farner is the god of war. In Throne of Glass, during the Yulmus scene, Duke Parrington is gifted a silver sword, which is meant to represent Farner. SJM is a confirmed Tolkien fan, so Farner's name could be inspired by Fëanor, but honestly, just like I said when I mentioned Tolkien last time, I just don't know enough about that world to comment on this, and I know that I need to read it and get into it, but I haven't, okay? The TBR is very long, and I don't do well sitting through movies, so. And now we have Themis. If I had to choose a goddess in the Throne of Glass world, Themis would be mine. Themis is the goddess of wild things and the protector of caged animals. Themis has no counterpart in our human mythology. Artemis, however, is the goddess of wild animals and wilderness, and if you remove the AR from Artemis, you get Themis. So, again, there are some loose connections there. Themis is connected to Lysandra, who often prays to her, especially since Lysandra is a shapeshifter. In Queen of Shadows, Aelin and Manon destroy one of Themis' temples during a fight. To be fair, though, Themis' temple was already in rough shape before Aelin and Manon fully fucked it up. In the flashback scene in Empire of Storms, Themis is described when Elena mentions, quote, the one of many shifting voices, both animal and human. When Dorian masters his shape-shifting abilities, he claims, quote, yet the ability to shift lay within something else entirely, lay within a part of him that had always yearned for one thing above all others, to let go, to be free, as Themis, goddess of wild things, was free, uncaged, as he had once wished to be when he had been little more than a reckless, idealistic prince. And now we are down to the last two confirmed gods and goddesses. Again, I'm still in that 12. Lanny is the goddess of dreams. We learn about her in Assassin's Blade, and that is all we learn. Loomis is the lord of the gods and the god of love. He is said to be the firstborn of the great goddess. Again, we learn about him when his birth is celebrated at Yulmus, where he is depicted with glistening wings. Loomis is said to be the one to bring love and union to Aurelia after the chaos brought by the Gates of Word. Loomis means light. Before we move on to the last two gods and goddesses in Throne of Glass, let's talk about Loomis, aka Lord of the Gods, because I think that Loomis' existence brings up some questions. Who is the great goddess, who is supposedly his mother, and why don't we know her name? Is the great goddess present at the end of Kingdom of Ash? And if she is she meant to be counted in the 12 gods we see in that final scene? I'm going to get more into that at the end of this, but I have some real questions about who is and isn't present in those 12. Let's talk about Tehom. Tehom is the Lady of the Great Deep. She is the goddess of the oceans and its creatures. Tehom is only mentioned by name in Tower of Dawn. Tehom, spelled Tehom, means the deep or abyss in Hebrew. In Tower of Dawn, we learn that there's a holiday and a feast for the Lady of the Great Deep. People lay wreaths in the water as offerings to Tehom. But this is also where I get a little confused. In Queen of Shadows, we get this scene between Nezrin and Chaol where she takes him to a temple in Rifthold. This temple is called the Sea God's Temple. Sea God, not sea goddess, which Tehom is a goddess. At this temple, sailors and fishermen make their offerings and ask for blessings before setting sail. During this scene, Nezrin makes Chaol swear that he'll walk out of the castle tomorrow. This is right before the Dorian rescue scene, which is when Chaol, in his internal monologue, reveals that this temple is the sea god's temple, who is also the god of oaths. In Empire of Storms, Rolf gives the crew the full download about just how he got his magical map. He says that he thought it was a gift from a god, and though he doesn't necessarily specify, it seems like he believes it's a sea god. That's something we got into during our Assassin's Blade coverage because several questions about that. But then, during the flashback scene in Empire of Storms, Elena describes one of the gods as, quote, one that was of sea and sky and storms. So we do know that there is a sea god or goddess in those 12 gods and goddesses, but we're just unsure of who. So we kind of have two competing ideas, okay? We have Tehom, who is the Lady of the Great Deep, the goddess of the oceans, and then we have that sea god's temple, which is where Chaol and Nezrin visit. God and goddess, they're very different. One is female, one is male. During the flashback scene, Elena describes one of the gods as one that was of sea and sky and storms. So we know that a sea god or goddess is one of those 12, but we're just unsure of who, and this description does not specify if it's a male or a female. It doesn't say the goddess that was of sea and sky and storms or the god of sea and sky and storms. It just says one that was of sea and sky and storms. So one of these two is in the 12, but I don't know. I personally do not think Tehom and the sea god are the same god, but when researching, it seems like some readers think that they are the same god. Let me know what you think. And then we have Vanth. Vanth is the goddess of the dead. Vanth is, again, only mentioned in Tower of Dawn. Nezrin notes, quote, Vanth, goddess of the dead. Her presence in this city predated even Silba's healers. Her worshippers a secretive sect that even the Kagan and his predecessors feared and respected, despite her rituals being wholly different from the eternal sky to which the Kagan and the Dargan believed they returned. Nezrin had walked swiftly past Vanth's dark stone temple earlier, the entrance marked only by a set of onyx steps descending into a subterranean chamber lit with bone-white candles. Spooky. Okay, very spooky. Also, eternal sky. Tower of Dawn is going to be so interesting, you guys, to cover. We're very far from that, but... However, SJM probably took the name from Vanth, who is an Etruscan, aka connected to Tuscany, goddess. In Etruscan mythology, Vanth is a winged goddess associated with death and the underworld. I put her here because I am torn on whether or not I think Vanth is in the 12 gods and goddesses who were present at the end of Kingdom of Ash. That is because we already have one that's of death, like the dark god. That is Hellas. So, I don't know. If Vanth was not in that 12, though, then I do think the sea god is a separate god from Tehom and was possibly in that 12. Like I said at the beginning of this section, I only counted 10 confirmed gods and goddesses that I feel confident were present at the final scene in Kingdom of Ash. However, we know that there are 12 gods and goddesses who get sent back to their homeworld because Aelin says, quote, she clung to it, shielded it as they appeared, 12 figures through the portal behind her. I think we can for sure say that we know the name of 10 of those 12. Mala, Deanna, the three-faced goddess, Silba, Hellas, Anith, Kiva, Barner, Temis, Lanny, and Loomis. But I do not think that we can count Tehom and Vanth in those 12. However, can we count the sea god and the great goddess, aka Loomis's mother? That would make 12 gods. However, that does still leave us with 5 extras. So let's get into our 5 extras. We have the mother goddess, the god of truth/sin eater, Bast, Ina, and Neith. Let's start small and build up to our big ones. Bast. We learn about Bast in Tower of Dawn, where we learn that the Bast cats are named after a warrior goddess. The Bast cats have always lived in the Tori Chesme library and are mysterious in origin/replacement. They have unique personalities and beryl-colored eyes. I had never seen that word before, but I learned that beryl is actually clear when it's pure, but it's usually often emerald green or aquamarine. The Bast cats have rumored magical abilities like shadow travel, and they also get caught reading books. So there are always 36 female Bast cats in the Tori Chesme, which is why I said that the replacement aspect of them is confusing because, sadly, cats die. So how we're always at 36 creates some questions, okay? And again, shout out to the Throne of Glass wiki because I'm not very familiar with Egyptian mythology, but Bast and the Bast cats are probably based on the Egyptian goddess Bastet. Bastet and Sekhmet were 2 sides of the same goddess. Sekhmet was fierce and a warrior/healer. Bastet became known as a gentler cat-like goddess. So, Bastet, Bast, you get it. Then we have Ina, or Ina, however you want to pronounce it, which is Inna, who again appears only in Tower of Dawn. Inna is the goddess of peaceful households and of the Balruni people. When Nesrin describes her statue, she says that the statue is curvy-bodied and that the arms of the statue are upraised in welcome and defense. But that is all that we learn about Inna or Ina. And finally, we have Neith, who is connected to Nesrin, who is often referred to as Neith's arrow. In Tower of Dawn, we learn that Sartak had already heard of Nesrin because his spies called her Neith's arrow. In Tower of Dawn, we learn that Neith is the goddess of archery and the hunt and originally hailed from, quote, an ancient sand-swept kingdom to the west, but is now unfolded into the southern continent's vast pantheon. Remember, they have like 36 gods and goddesses that they celebrate. If that description, though, sounds familiar to you, the goddess of archery and the hunt, you are correct. It sounds like Deanna. It's possible that Neith is another name for Deanna in the Throne of Glass world, and different kingdoms refer to her by different names, kind of how in our mythology, Diana and Artemis are basically the same goddess and just go by different names based on the region. Neith is the Egyptian goddess of hunting in our mythology. She was often called Mistress of the Bow and Ruler of Arrows. Neith was associated with two different emblems, a shield crossed with two arrows or a weaving shuttle. And now to our bigger gods and goddesses that seem to exist outside of those 12 that return to the homeworld and possibly die. First up, we have the god of truth or Sin Eater. This god is first introduced in Queen of Shadows. Kale originally claims that the shadow market had been, quote, built on the bones of the god of truth so that it would keep the vendors and would-be thieves honest. Kale supposed it was ironic considering there was no god of truth, as far as he knew. But we quickly learn that there is a god of truth. The crew sneaks deep beneath the shadow market and finds that the temple is actually built almost entirely of human bones, which is gross. The bones are carved with the confessions of people's sins that they committed in life. Does that sound familiar to you, Maasverse people? It should. Adian points out that the writing is in all different languages and most of the confessions are bad things. Because of this, Adian refers to the god of truth as a sin eater. Quote, I think this was a place for them to be buried and to confess on the bones of other sinners. Everyone kind of goes along with the sin eater thing, and I don't know if we're meant to think that sin eater is like a common term, or is it something that Adian made up on the spot? Okay, I don't know. While they're in this temple, Aelin begins to wonder if Damaris, the Sword of Truth, aka Gavin's sword, was blessed by the Sin Eater. This prompts Aelin to continue exploring the temple. She drops Damaris onto the altar floor, and then carvings appear in word marks. The carvings reveal the truth about Elena, Gavin, and Erewhon. Aelin reads a hidden confession from Gavin, revealing that Erewhon was never killed, only put to sleep and buried in a sealed tomb beneath Morath. This is the moment when they realize that Erewhon could be at play and that their mission is much bigger than they originally thought. Up to this point, they thought Erewhon was killed. The fact that that's your confession, Gavin? King, please. And now let's close out the gods and goddesses with the Mother Goddess. In Throne of Glass, we learn about the Mother Goddess as Selena searches for information on word gates and word keys in the library. Quote, some theories suggest the Mother Goddess is just a spirit from one of these other worlds, and that she strayed through something called a word gate and found Aurelia in need of form and life. We learn that the Mother is basically a world walker. Okay. The concept of this Mother Goddess is not expanded upon. Now that I laid out all of our gods and goddesses, let's talk about the general storyline of the gods and goddesses in Throne of Glass. From around Crown of Midnight, we're introduced to the idea that the gods and goddesses are kind of MIA. Selena says, quote, but there were no gods left to bargain with, no one to offer her soul to in exchange for another moment with Nehemia. And we hear sentiments like that from other characters too. When he's captured by the king, Adian says that the gods haven't helped him in the last 10 years, and he doesn't think that they're going to now. In Empire of Storms, we learn more about the gods during the Witch Mirror flashbacks, which I referenced as I laid out the different gods. Basically, during the events of the Second Valid War with Elena and Brannon, the gods had made a deal. Brannon was supposed to use the lock to seal the word keys back into the gates, and then send the gods and goddesses back to their home world and lock Erewhon away, basically. They would take Erewhon with them. They made this deal because when the Valg removed the 3 slivers from the word gate to create the word keys, they broke the word gate, essentially trapping these gods and goddesses in Aurelia. Remember, they come from another world. When Elena used the lock to contain Erewhon, she fucked up the plan and the gods were pissed. Elena asks if someone else can pay the price, someone who is better prepared. Side eye. Side eye. Mala speaks up, saying that they'll just have to wait a little longer. And that's when the 3-faced goddess suggests the new deal. Someone from their bloodline will have to pay the price with Elena as their guide. And thus, the nameless prophecy was born. The reason that the gods have been kind of MIA is because they're really only interested in waiting for the descendant that can fulfill the prophecy and send them back home. Those witch mirror flashbacks reveal so much about the gods and goddesses. When the gods and goddesses appear to Elena during this witch mirror flashback, they have no forms. They were, quote, only figments of light and shadow, wind and rain, song and memory, each individual and yet part of one majority, one consciousness. Elena also says, quote, not just gods, but beings of a higher, different existence, for whom time was fluid and bodies were things to be shifted and molded, who could exist in multiple places, spread themselves wide like nets being thrown. They were as mighty and vast and eternal as a human was to a mayfly. They had not been born in this world, perhaps had become trapped here after wandering through a word gate, and they had struck some bargain with her father, with Mala, to at last send them home, banishing Erewhon with them. And she had ruined it. Yeah, Elena, you did ruin it. So sorry. So, we learn that these gods are almost more than gods. Time does not function for them like it does for the other characters in the story, and they can exist in various places. And again, they had not been born in this world, which, interesting. In Kingdom of Ash, the gods and goddesses appear after the lock is forged, and they're like, I'm ready to go home, okay? We see the 12 figures appear, and they're like, let's skedaddle. We know that there were 12 gods there because Aelin says, quote, she clung to it, shielded it as they appeared, 12 figures through the portal behind her. During this final meeting, we see that these gods and goddesses are not merciful, caring, or forgiving, especially Deanna. Deanna, it's on sight, babes. It's on sight. Remember, the deal is that the gods would take Erewhon with them to destroy him because Aelin is sacrificing herself to forge the lock. That's when Aelin offers them that different deal instead. They'll handle Erewhon, but the gods need to spare Elena's soul, who they currently have captive. If they agree to this trade, Elena's soul will be able to remain in the afterworld with those she loves rather than be destroyed. Again, this is when Deanna is just a huge bitch, and she laughs and basically tells Aelin, like, we never planned to banish Erewhon or honor this promise that we made with you guys. And that's when she steps forward and destroys Elena. That's when we see Mala kind of returning to herself. Mala flinches in pain when Elena, her daughter, is destroyed. Deanna begins using the lock to return the gods to the homeworld, but this is when Mala betrays them all. Mala begins to hesitate, and it seems like she begins to remember Elena and Brannon and her life. Mala can see that Aelin's wheels are turning, and Aelin wants vengeance on the gods, and Mala basically eggs Aelin on. She literally says, do it. You guys. This is when Mala gives Aelin a kernel of her power, which she calls, quote, one last gift to my bloodline, and then tells Aelin about the map on her back, which will lead her back to Rowan, back to Aurelia. Mala crosses into the gods' homeworld. Aelin then rips open another portal to a hell realm, which she saw before, and begins letting the creatures and demons enter the gods' homeworld. Okay. The gods wanted Aelin to close the gate behind them, and instead, she opened another. That is like the most Aelin thing I've ever heard. Aelin doesn't just reject their plan, she literally rips open the universe to let chaos into their homeworld. She uses the very power that the gods demanded from her to destroy them, because she is a true baddie. When the portal to their realm is opened, we get some pretty interesting descriptions of the gods and goddesses' homeworld. It's described as having, quote, sunlight over a rolling green country, which the sun is so bright that it nearly blinds Aelin. Aelin also describes their homeworld as a green sun-drenched world with shimmering grass. The general consensus seems to be that the gods and goddesses die. I, however, think that we do not 100% know what happens to the gods and goddesses in Throne of Glass. The last we see and hear of them, they're screaming in fear and anger. But I think that the only thing that we can say for sure is that they're not in Aurelia anymore. So where does that leave us? Aurelia becomes a land without gods, and Aelin even describes it as such. Quote, a world with no gods, no masters of fate, a world of freedom. It's really interesting because from the beginning of the series, the gods and goddesses are seen as absent, and by the end of it, they've truly abandoned Aurelia entirely, and again, are probably dead. In a way, Aelin has actually punished these gods and goddesses for what they've done, for being unwilling to help without receiving something in return, which is not very godlike. This ending suggests that a better world is one that's free from divine interference, which is a super interesting concept in the context of the Maasverse. These gods manipulated everything. They created prophecies, they determined fates, and without them, the people of Aurelia are finally free to shape their own lives. The entire ending of the series raises a million questions for me. Were the 12 gods and goddesses of Throne of Glass truly gods at all? Especially since they weren't born in Aurelia and seem more like powerful interdimensional beings rather than divine creators. These are not compassionate, forgiving gods. They are self-serving and honestly kind of cruel. And if they weren't gods, what makes a god? Is it power? Is it divine responsibility? If they weren't gods, what were they? What do we owe the gods or those who created us if they never loved us? And what did Mala become? Why is she the only goddess to show empathy, to show grief and love? Is it because she yielded her mortality? Is it because she loved Brandon and her children? Is she a true god because she chose compassion over power? I know that's a lot of questions, but I will leave you with this. What does it mean that the most divine act in Throne of Glass wasn't done by a god, but by Aelin? Aelin, who was willing to sacrifice everything, not for glory or power or worship, but to give others a chance to live free. Aelin, who chose to give everything for a future she might not even see. Is that godhood? Is it something more? And finally, let's just do a super quick Maasverse note. This is your warning. The next 60-ish seconds will contain Maasverse spoilers for Crescent City and Throne of Glass. You can check the show notes if you want to see where to skip ahead so you can listen to the wrap up for this episode. So let's close this episode out by talking about the word, because we can't talk about gods and goddesses without talking about the word. In Crown of Midnight, we learn that, quote, the word governs and forms the foundation of this world, not just Aurelia, but all life. There are worlds that exist beyond your knowledge, worlds that lie on top of each other and don't know it. Right now, you could be standing on the bottom of someone else's ocean. The word keeps these realms apart. So, all of these gods and goddesses exist within the word, which ultimately governs them all. And again, I went back and forth on whether to include this or not, but we learn in Crescent City that the word is actually a god force, if you will. I don't know what else to call it, really. The Underking says Erd, spelled U-R-D, quote, was not a goddess, but a force that governed worlds, a cauldron of life. And in the old world, she was called Word, spelled W-Y-R-D, aka our word in Throne of Glass. This confirms that Erd from Crescent City and the word from Throne of Glass are the same cosmic god force. While not confirmed, Erd/Word's description, aka a life-giving force tied to creation, is basically how the mother in ACOTAR is described. The mother spilled the cauldron to create Prythian, and when the Underking is describing Erd/Word, he calls her a cauldron of life. So while each series has its own lore and pantheon, it's heavily implied that Erd, Word, and the Mother are all maybe, possibly, different names for the same powerful, life-creating force that connects the entire Maasverse. Again, we for sure know that Erd and Word are the same thing. The Mother is what's up for debate. And that's a wrap on our special episode, The Gods and Goddesses of Throne of Glass. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to me yap about this. It is genuinely one of my favorite things to deep dive, and I think you can hear it in my voice that I was very excited to talk about it. Join us next week for our Q2 quarterly reading wrap-up, where we'll talk about all the books we read this quarter. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out. Keep reading, Assassins. Bye!